On May 26th of 1863, there were 6 miners out of Bannack. They were headed for the Yellowstone country on an expedition. Got into all kinds of trouble on the other side of the mountain. Wound up turning around and headed back to Bannack. They camped for the night down at the end of the street on the gulch. While one of them was fixing supper, the other boys went to look for a little color in the creek. The color they found, one of the largest placer gold deposits ever discovered in the world. Placer meaning the gold is all held in the alluvial fine materials in the stream bed. In other words, in the sands and gravels. 1864 prices, $16 an ounce for gold. They mined over $100 million worth of gold out of the sculpts behind you. And that was just the placer gold, it was not the hard rock or the dredging operations. Not the miners, came the merchants. With the miners and the merchants came some individuals who didn't want to work for a living. Go figure. Some of them were called road agents. Had a very high percentage of robberies and murders early on. In fact, in the first year of existence, we had over 100 murders. Towards the end of 1863, part of the merchants and miners were Masons. And if you look right over across the street from the second story, that is a Masonic temple. It is still active today. Those Masons formed a group called the Vigilantes, and the Vigilantes set about cleaned up territory, much as they'd done in California and Colorado. In the course of 6 weeks' time, they hung 22 individuals. On January 14th, they brought 5 of those individuals into town. They put them on trial. They were found guilty, and they were sentenced to be hung. And we're looking for a place to hang them. Just so happens to be this brown building over here across the street with the 2 doors. That building is still known today as the Hangman's Building. It was under construction at the time. The roof was not on it. But if you look down the near wall there, you'll see a bump over the window. That's a beam pocket. There's a beam that runs from this wall to the other wall. Holds 2 walls, parallel and perpendicular. That was a perfect place for hanging. They took the 5 individuals over there. They put them up on boxes. They said their goodbyes. And one of them said, "Hooray for Jefferson Davis," and jumped to his death. Obviously, he was a Southern sympathizer, as were a good portion of the miners here. And after the tour, you get a chance to wander around over there. Far over there's Dave Baker's Hat Shop and Rock Shop. Dave knows about everything there is to know about a rock. Halfway decent hatter also. The near side there is the Sarah Bickford side. There's a depiction of the hanging in there, plus the old beam is still there. And you can actually see the rope marks on the old beam if you look closely. And there's a great story there about Sarah Bickford. She was the first black woman known a utility company in the United States. She owned a water company here for years. Pretty interesting story about her life and how she got here. The 5 individuals hung over there, they're all buried up on Boot Hill. We're headed to Boot Hill to show you the grave sites. Got to give you a little history lesson along the way. Show you some of the more interesting sights around town. So sit back, enjoy the view, and enjoy the ride on the fire truck.
Does the brakes work?
Nope. I'll ask you to drag your feet though, maybe.
Get all that, sweetie?
Well, Vigilantes had a number system they used. It is the numbers 3777. If you found those numbers on your cabin, your tent, your lean-to, the wagon you were living under, or the rock you were hiding under, that meant that you had 3 hours, 7 minutes, and 77 seconds to get going, or they would find you in the pitch in a hole in the ground measuring 3 foot by 7 foot by 77 inches. You run across the Montana State Highway Patrolman today, you'll find them still carrying the same message, same moniker. It's on their badges as well as on the sides of the vehicles. White building there at the right for Elks Lodge, built in 1898. Same year as our charter for Elks Lodge number 390. Celebrating 127 years this year. This is our county courthouse, built in 1876. It's closed for repairs and renovations right now. Got water and mold damage in there. It's unfortunate because there's some pretty cool architecture in there. Just inside the door there on the right-hand side, there's a hardwood spiral grand staircase. Goes upstairs to the second story where the courtroom is. And the old courtroom still has original wooden pews in it, just like when it was built. A lot of famous trials have taken place up there in that courtroom. Out here on the courthouse lawn on the 4th of July, in early days, large celebrations were held. Miners came from all over to celebrate. It's a big day for them. Played miners games, rock grilling, all sorts of stuff. The highlight of the day, the firing of the cannon. There was a mountain howitzer that sat there in the corner of the lawn with a rocket tree yard. They fired the cannon over across daylight, village on the far hill over there. Incidentally, that far hill over there is still called Cannonball Hill today. 5 remnants of cannonballs over there. Now that was great sport for everyone, and everyone enjoyed that a whole bunch. all except for one individual. Didn't like it. Not at all, not ever. His house was over there. The bloody fools kept shooting at it. Probably heard of the mountain man Jeremiah Johnson. He lived here for a period of time. Later went on to become sheriff over in Red Bluff, Montana. Somebody else that lived here actually spent their childhood here, grew up here. It's Martha Jane Canary. Any idea who that is? Calamity Jane, gold star for you. She's buried in Deadwood, South Dakota, alongside of Wild Bill Hickok. Got a lot of people traveling, been to Deadwood, been grave sites before they come here. People here headed for Deadwood. Interesting crossover. The house here behind the white fence, the doctor's residence. Her name was Flora McNulty. Interestingly, we had a lady doctor out here in the middle of the wilderness, almost for her territory. The building here next door with the red trim, that is the governor's mansion. Yeah, I know, it's kind of a quaint little cottage. But when you consider most everybody else living in tents and lean-tos and under wagons, wouldn't have been a bad place to spend the winter. I've had all the amenities at home there. The brown building here next door shipped in here complete on a freight wagon. Assembled just like you would Lincoln logs. Yep, came with a full set of instructions, just like Lincoln logs. Kid could have built it. In 1864, you could order a two-story hardwood floor home from Sears and Roebuck for $3,850. Unfortunately today, most kids don't think we could order anything before they invented the internet. Stone building on down the street on the right, Thompson Hickman Museum and Library, built in 1918. The museum down the basement has a lot of artifacts gathered up for the 1900. Tell you more about it as we go up the hill. Open area over here to the left, known as the Brewery Gardens. Large celebrations were held down here in the past. And I am sure if those old trees could talk, oh, the stories they could tell. Ahead of us here is the Gilbert Brewery, built in 1864. They brewed beer here right up until 1919 when Prohibition hit. And then they closed their doors forever as a brewery. It just so happens to be this is the home of the Brewery Follies, one of our live entertainment groups. Don't bring the kiddies, they won't like it. But for the adults, you might have to have some tape your lips back together from laughing because they are pretty hilarious. And they are absolutely positively not politically correct. And they leave no stones unturned either. Believe me, there's nothing sacred with these guys. Unfortunately, they are done for the year. But we're already looking forward to next year because God only knows what they're going to come up with while they're sitting around all winter long convincing amongst themselves. There's the brewery wagon. Look at how heavy the suspension is in that wagon. I'm going to haul those kegs of beer out to the miners on that wagon. One of the questions always asked is, well, why do miners drink beer? Had a large population of this drainage. Sanitary conditions were deplorable. Waterborne illness, #1 killer of the population. Beer was by far the most sanitary thing they'd get their hands on. In fact, as the brewers actually went out of their way to haul fresh water from the other side of the mountain just to brew their beer with. Front of the building, great example of a false front or facade. When people came from the east, they wanted the towns to the west to look the biggest towns in the east. So they would add a false front or facade to their buildings to add dimension to their towns. 1863, beer, $2 a gallon. Whiskey, $7 a gallon. The whiskey cut by 50%, most times with chewing tobacco and gunpowder. It's called tarantula juice. Many a man lost his battle with tarantula juice. Had 3 breweries and 19 drinking establishments within a 3-mile radius. Building there ahead of us on the hillside, that is original Brewmaster's building, built in 1863. Obviously, he did pretty well for himself. He started this much larger brewery the very next year. Part of the reason he was so successful, had a lot of cheap labor at his disposal. They had 14 kids in the family. Open area here to the right where the parking lot is, there was a set of barracks here that came from Maelstrom Air Force Base up in Great Falls. When the Bovies moved here in the 40s from Great Falls to start to restore Virginia City and Nevada City, they brought them with them for the workers and actors to live in. There's a little street community all to itself. People actually lived in it through the 90s. They were in such bad disrepair, they tore them down a couple of years ago. But if it had not been for Charlie and Sue Bovie and the millions of dollars they poured into this town, if I even much here to see, so hats always off to Charlie and Sue for keeping the town alive and preserving all the history on it. Stone wall there at the door in the center, great example of an underground cellar. In other words, a big refrigeration unit. When you store stuff in the ground, the temperature remains very constant. Makes a great place to store produce, amongst other things. It'll last for a long time in there. Go ahead and enjoy the view. I'll give you some more information, so go up the hill. This is Boot Hill. The reason this is called Boot Hill, there are 13 road agents buried up here. These individuals were all brought into town. They were put on trial, found guilty and hung, and then hauled up here very unceremoniously, stuffed in a hole without their boots on. Now that doesn't mean to say if one of them had on a good pair of boots, somebody else didn't have their boots on for the end of the day. The part two of the first 5 graves, I'll move ahead to the others for just a minute. These are the 5 guys that were all hung in the same day. None of these guys is famous. The guy there in the middle, Boone Hill, he's the guy that set a raid for Jefferson Davis. A side note on him, he was convicted cannibal in Canada. People always ask me, all these guys that got hung, were they really all bad guys? He damn sure was. The guy in the end down there, George Lane, his nickname is Clubfoot George. Had a shoe repair business down on Main Street. His lot with this group was to watch the stage station and see when the next shipment of gold was going out. Had a sheriff at the time by the name of Henry Plummer. Henry came to us courtesy of California, where he'd done time in San Quentin prison for murder. He was out on parole. A well-spoken, well-dressed individual came to Montana Territory looking for a job. They needed a sheriff in Bannock, and they hired him. And he immediately started to put together this gang of thieves. Henry Plummer and 2 of his deputies were hung from their own gallows in Bannock, and they're still buried there today. Now, originally, the hilltop up here is called Burial Hill. Over 100 grave sites up here. But after the road agents were buried up here, the local people didn't want to be here anymore. They started a new cemetery up behind us, and they either moved their loved ones' remains or they simply moved the headstones up to the new cemetery. By the 1920s, the cemetery was pretty much in ruinous disarray. The only headstones that had been stolen had been pushed over. Down in one of the local establishments one day, there was an argument that ensued about whether or not anybody was really buried up here, or whether it was simply just a bunch of BS. Now, I'm not going to say whether alcohol was involved or not, but some said yes, some said no. The argument escalated, the bets were made, and up the hill they came with their digging utensils. And they dug up Clubfoot George. Of course, they could identify him. And his buried right exactly where Clubfoot George was supposed to be buried, just like all the stories said, right there on the end. And because they had in fact dug up Clubfoot George, where he was supposed to be, thus proving all the stories. For years and years and years and years and more years, his foot was in a glass case down in the museum. We no longer have that piece of history. We now have a replica. Look down here left the creek bottom, you see Pond. That pond's part of the stream bed of Alder Gulch. Alder Gulch runs 8 miles up the creek that way, 8 miles down the creek this way. A miner's claim, 100 foot of creek frontage from the center line of the creek perpendicular to it. In other words, claims ran up one side of the creek and down the other. At one time, they said there were close to 35,000 individuals here on Alder Gulch. By 1868, this place looked like the surface of the moon. There was no vegetation left anywhere inside. The trees had all been removed, either for building materials or for wood. They even dug the stumps out of the ground for wood. And of course, to check for gold underneath them. You look up the creek there, the green silos between the 2 roads over top the bank of Cottonwoods. That is another commercial gold operation. It also is inactive at this time. About 200 yards below that, there's a rock monument called the Point of Discovery. That monument is to the 6 original miners. That's where they discovered the gold on May 26th of 1863. If you would like to visit that, you can drive up Jackson Street and follow the signs, the Point of Discovery. Normally, you'd be able to catch a ride in the stagecoach, but a couple days back, they got held up. Shot up really bad. Haven't made it back to town yet. Actually, their horses had to go back to Texas, back to their next job. They're no longer here this summer. Sorry about that. The white building over top the Wells Fargo sign used to be a hospital. It's now called the Bonanza Inn. It is one of the buildings that is on the Ghost Tour. It originates Pioneer Bar. They're running tours out of there by appointment only. All things spooky, past and present. You never know what's going to happen on a ghost tour. This is William and Claire Dalton. No relation to famous Dalton family. These individuals came on a wagon train to Bannock, due back over here to Virginia City. They died 7 days apart of mountain fever, leaving 4 children. One of their granddaughters, who's buried over in Dillon, had this stone wall erected around her grandparents to separate them from the road agents. And incidentally, 9 years ago, I had 17 individuals in a fire truck one day, all direct descendants of those two. And I got to sit up here for 30 minutes and I got a history lesson. Pretty cool, let me tell you. Grandma confirmed a lot of what we perceive to be history. She told some other stories I can't confirm, but believe me, they were also very interesting. Look up the ridge there where the taller trees are to the right of the buildings. That's where the new cemetery is. Look up here to the skyline. You see a notch up here on top of the hill. Come over to the left side of it, halfway down the hill, coming out of the left corner of the notch. You can see a roadway coming on an angle down across the face of the hill. That is the freight wagon road coming into Virginia City. It is an extension of the Bozeman Trail. That over the portion of the Montana Trail out of Salt Lake City, Oneontas. The road on this side is known as the Slade Road. Is owned by the Slade family. Had a toll booth on the other side of the mountain. Now, in early freight wagon roads, where there were bad places, private enterprise would move in. They would fix the roadway and then erect a toll booth. You wanted to use our no-approved road, had to pay a toll. You'd pay as much as $10 a wagon. Some people paid 25 cents just for their dog. In 1866, we have freight records that show over $12.5 million worth of merchandise came down that roadway into Virginia City. And that had been in a short 8-month period. You came over the hill from Annis, you're headed over the hill to Annis. The flat spot on top of the hill, still known today as the racetrack, where they used to race the ponies on Sunday afternoons. A stamp today, 78 cents. Back then it was $1 for a lot. The difference today the sender pays. Back then the receiver paid. Mrs. Sanders, one of the local ladies, she hadn't received any mail for a while. Stagecoach came in, she had 25 letters. Cost her $25 to gather up all of her mail. The sheriff, Henry Plummer, he ordered a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner to impress his political friends. Cost him $40 out of Salt Lake City. Those political friends? Yeah, same guys that hung him 2 months later. Careful who you invite to dinner, I guess. You get a good look at the courthouse. To the left of the courthouse, the stone building between the two big trees. St. Paul's Episcopal Church, built in 1902 out of native stone. The glass is imported from Germany. It is the only active church in Virginia City, and its doors have never been locked. It's open 24/7 to everyone, and I would encourage everyone to go have a look at it because it is truly an absolute gem. Just remember, everything there was hauled in on a freight wagon. Never had a railhead here in Virginia City. Look over across the way. That meant anything unusual and different. And I am sure with all the livestock and all the individuals we had here in this area, I'm sure there's probably a lot of things unusual and different happened down here in this corral system. We even had camels hauling in freight here at one time. Don't believe the camels ever got into town, but we know for a fact they were hauling freight up across Idaho from Salt Lake City. Had an individual moved up early on from Colorado, a very affluent businessman by the name of Captain Jack Slade. But after Captain Jack got here to Virginia City, he got into the tarantula juice, became one of the town drunks. On March 10th, he was riding his horse up and down Main Street, shooting his Navy Colt revolver, backing his horse into doors and windows and running over people. Went into the theater, which was having a performance at the time, caused quite a disruption in there. Came out of the theater, came up to the general store. The general store is a brown building there with the steps going up in the back. When he came in the general store, he pulled his pistol on the proprietor. It just so happened to be the proprietor was the president of the Vigilantes. Captain Jack was arrested for drunken disorderly conduct, which is a misdemeanor. Well, the townsfolk heard Captain Jack had been arrested. A crowd started to gather. The Vigilantes being on a roll, somebody suggested maybe they ought to hang Jack Slade. They sent word to his wife, Virginia. Remember the Slade Road? She was working the toll booth on the other side of the mountain. And Virginia? She was a better shot and a better horseman than most of the men in the territory. Frankly, most of the men in the territory were scared to death of her. She always came and got Jack. They waited for a bit. The crowd got larger, more boisterous. They decided to hang Jack Slade. As they were coming down the steps, they could see Virginia coming off the hill behind us. They were hurrying him down here to the elephant's curl. They hung him from the gatepost. Virginia arrived on scene. She gathered up Jack, took him up to her house. And because she did not want him buried in the territory, she put him in her bathtub and she pickled him for the rest of the winter.
Oh, Lord.
You gotta look at the bright side of things. She only had to do the outside, the inside's already done.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
When the stage line started to run again in the springtime, he was sent to Utah. And he is buried today in the Mormon Avenue Cemetery in Salt Lake City. Got a lot of people in the Salt Lake area know about exactly where Jack's buried. Said they always knew he was there. They could just never figure out quite how he got there. At the time, a one-way ticket, $225. Freight, 16 cents a pound. No, we do not know how Jack went. You think about it. If you went on a stagecoach in a coffin, only place that coffin would have fit would have been up on top of that stagecoach. All that weight up there sloshing around, top heavy as this stagecoach would have been, amongst other things. That driver had dumped him in the sagebrush half a mile out of town. There's another story that has Virginia sitting alongside of him, holding his pickled fingers all the way to Salt Lake City. Don't believe that happened either, but we don't know for sure. We just don't know how Jack went. We just know he's there. There's lots of stories and no answers, unfortunately. The one thing we do know for sure about Jack Slade, he is the only individual who was ever hung for a misdemeanor in the territory of Montana, the state of Montana. His Navy Colt revolvers in the Gene Autry Museum in California. As for Virginia, well, she remarried. Married one of the Vigilantes. Actually, one of the guys that hung her husband. They said that didn't last very long either. Can't understand why. Had a large red light district here in Virginia City, most of them along this side of the creek here. This was the dark side of town. Good people didn't come over onto this side of the creek, especially not after dark. That is, unless they came through one of the tunnels that originated over in the businesses on Main Street and terminated over here at the creek bank. A lot of comments about this cabin. Why is the roof so low? Why is the door so short? It's about resources. Those logs were all hauled in here. They're all hand-hewed, which is very time-consuming. If you look at how the corners are laid in there, the corners are laid in there on a double bevel. The way the building holds the building together. There's no nails in it. There's a single beam that runs from one wall to the other wall of the window and door. That's why the door is so short. And I'm sure the individuals that built that cabin would much rather been out digging for gold to build a cabin. But when winter time came, it's probably a great asset because I'm sure there's a lot of people who paid a lot of money to spend that cabin. Montana Heritage Commission put a foundation underneath it, shored it up, straightened it up, rechecked it, fixed it up for viewing. Somebody actually lived in there until the mid-1950s. The buildings here on the left, the ones up behind on the right, all built prior to 1900. All the better buildings are all up on Idaho Street, up by the church. That's where the merchants built their houses when their wives arrived on scene. Funny how that happens. You came up from Alder, you're headed down to Alder, down to Nevada City, down to creek bottom here for the next 8 miles. There's a whole series of gravel piles and rock piles. That's from the dredging operations that took place here. At one time, we had 2 of the largest dredges ever built in the world operating here, and operated through 1939 when World War II hit. One reason they ceased operations then is they could no longer get steel to repair the dredges with because of the war effort. Building up here on the right, the train depot. It is a reproduction. Never had a train in Virginia City. Everything was all in here on a freight wagon. The Bovies built this. The train track runs down to Nevada City. The Montana Heritage Commission. And the train is done for the year, by the way. Had a large Chinese community here that ran across the road here, 2nd Street. Chinese temple here in the middle of the street where we're driving. Log cabin on the left, the schoolhouse, Montgomery Town, 2 miles to the north, 1st and 5th grade there. Notice the street lamps, they make kerosene oil back then. They lit them at night, put them out in the morning. On the right, the Opera House. We just finished up our 79th year of continuous live theater. Next door is the world famous Bale Hay Saloon, Montana's oldest watering hole. Return to Lonesome Dove and Little Big Man were filmed in there. That's the steward on the left. That's where Clifford George had his shoe repair business. Looking up the street at the state station. That building is a reproduction. Most of the rest of the buildings on this end of town, all original buildings. You see a lot of blacksmith shops in town. Took a lot of blacksmiths to keep everything functioning, working. They employed a lot of people here in town. Fairweather Inn on the left, after Bill Fairweather, one of the original discoverers of gold. Bill is buried in the new cemetery up on the hill. He died at age 39. Too much privileges. There's a great display here in the Gypsy Arcade on Nickelodeon's and music machines and a famous Gypsy fortune teller in the back wall. On the left, the Montana Post. That was our first newspaper. There's 2 floors in there as well as 2 floors next door in the museum. On the right, the 2-story building under reconstruction, Territorial Capitol. There's the Territorial Capitol all the way through 1875 when it was moved to Last Chance Gulch up in Helena. On the left, Greg's Drugstore Mercantile. That is the front side of the general store. You would look at the back side over there. It is still a working mercantile, one of the few businesses open around here in town. Got a great selection of pretty clothing in there, as well as one of the best bookstores around. Pull up here in park, finish up tour for you.